Test, test.
Oh, okay.
One more time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One more time. Welcome to Court Reporter Confidential.
A place to talk about all things court reporting, including industry news, technology, best practices, and personal experiences from professionals in the field.
Welcome back to another episode of Court Reporter Confidential. I'm your host, Isaiah Leslie. We're very excited this week to have on our show a guest all the way from Washington, D.C. If you're a member of the NCRA, you'll probably know who Colin Brehm is. He's the State Government Relations Manager at the National Court Reporters Association, and we're so happy to have him on the pod today to talk about advocacy and how it affects our industry. So welcome to the show, Colin.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we are excited to talk about a couple of different things this morning on the show that I think are really important right now in our industry. But before we get into some of those sort of hot topics, what does the NCRA Advocacy actually do? What is that?
So NCRA's advocacy team is composed of Dave Wenthold and myself, and we kind of have three different prongs. We have our federal level, state level, and then we also have the Political Action Committee. Under the Government Relations Team, or GR for short, we have three different committees. We have the National Congress of State Associations, or NCSA. We have the National Court Reporters Association Political Action Committee, which, as you're familiar with, as co-chair, is the fundraising arm for our federal advocacy efforts. And then we also have the Captioning Committee, or CAPCOM, which is what you'll hear a lot of folks call it. And that's composed of our professional captioners, who's a great team that also provides in-house captioning for NCRA content. So just starting at the federal level, right now we have a bill up in D.C. on the House and Senate side. It's a bipartisan effort in the Oversight of AI in Courts Act of 2026. This has been a years-long effort in getting that introduced and making sure that it is a bipartisan effort to ensure that it makes it out of committee. And we are currently working on securing bipartisan co-sponsors on the House side right now. Senators Roger Wicker is the main sponsor on the Senate side. The bipartisan co-sponsor in the Senate is Peter Welsh of Vermont. We also had Cindy Hyde-Smith, who is Senator Wicker's colleague from Mississippi, sign on. And then in the House, the chief patron is Senator Hageman from Wyoming. And then we have a bipartisan co-sponsor member from D.C., Eleanor Norton, who's a longtime member, great office there. And then also for the state stuff, what we like to do is work with the state associations. So we'll try to reach out if we see a piece of legislation on our monitoring platforms, anything that may be related to court reporting, captioning, or legal videography. Right now, we're seeing a lot of trends with artificial intelligence at the state level. So it's kind of interesting to see what can be hit or miss. We're also seeing a lot of redefining the licensure requirements for court reporting, and that has been also another kind of a backdoor way that AI and digital has been getting their foot in the door in terms of competing with stenographic court reporting. The PAC itself, we've been coming off a great fundraising haul, as you know, this last year, a 14-year high, second consecutive fundraising record with the state gift baskets that we raffle away every year. Just a lot of high energy right now in GR, and that's partially because of my predecessor, and then also the folks that have, spent years building this incredible system and how we operate. And I know it can seem frustrating to folks at times, but we are making sure that when we take a whack at something, that we make a good follow through and laying that punch. And also just with the way that Washington D.C. is, and also with a lot of state capitals, it's a lot slower than what it can be on TV shows or what you see on social media. Everything has to be vetted, everything has to be run through counsel, and it's tedious. And you have to really dot the I's and cross the T's, and we want to make sure we get it right the first time. So when it does come time to mobilize our members to advocate and provide context to legislators and their staffs, we don't want to have any false alarms. We don't want to have any sort of, hey, we think it's happening this time, so line everything up, and then you fatigue those non-renewable resources when it comes to mobilization of members. So I know, even with PAC, every time I said, oh, we're getting close, and then finally when it does drop, it can definitely be hit or miss. It can be kind of like a dance.
Well, yeah, that's a great point. And I like the inside baseball, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But, it reminds me of something similar My wife and I watch a lot of police procedurals, a lot of Dateline, and oftentimes when you're, the family of the victim and you think the police aren't doing anything, they're not moving on anything, they've been sitting on things for months and months and months, and then you get the perspective of the police and it's like, oh no, we have a suspect in mind, but we have to do our due diligence and we have to do it the right way because you only have one shot at this. And so from the outside, it looks like the police aren't doing anything.
Absolutely.
But from the inside, they're being very busy and very diligent, but they have to do it in sort of maybe not a secret way, but a very, methodical way, and a way in which you can't let a lot of information get out before it's ready because that can mess up the process, right? Is that kind of similar
Correct.
with what you do? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the perfect analogy.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, we love Dateline, so we can't get enough of that. But it is, to your point, from the membership standpoint, it looks like a lot of standing still. But really, if you could, pull the curtain back a little bit on what's happening behind the scenes inside the Beltway, inside Washington, D.C., I mean, what are some of the more mundane, routine, day-to-day things to get these senators, Congress people lined up to support the bills?
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. I went up to DC 3 times the other week, and I'll just kind of do like a get ready with me sort of thing. I hop on the train, I hop on Amtrak. It's about a 45-minute ride. During that time, I'll be sending follow-up emails to staffers just saying, hey, if you're around today, would love to drop in if I don't have a meeting scheduled already. And I'll also look at the committee hearings and see if there's any sort of committee hearings I can drop in on, specifically to the judiciary committees in the Senate and House. And then once I do get up there, I'll walk from the station over to the Senate side. Depending on, again, the calendar, I'll do drop-ins if I don't have scheduled things. And like what Dave does for boot camp, I'll have plenty of drop-off folders, which will have our bill, articles that are pertinent to our conversations or what we're advocating for at the time, do drop-ins. And it's just, it really is like an old school door-to-door salesman. If you haven't been to DC, these are just office buildings. They're very old and ornate office buildings. They're very special places, but there's still folks that are working there. And you go in, most of the times doors will be shut. There's a handful of offices that will have them open with "come on in" signs. You go in there, you see the receptionist. Sometimes if it's a Senate office, they'll have a couple staffers. Usually if it's the House side, they'll have at least 2 or 3 staffers. And you'll just say, hi, I'm, with the National Court Reporters Association. I was hoping to meet with the staffer today. Or you just drop the staffer's name if you have a meeting. They'll have you sit and wait there. Usually they'll offer you a drink. You can make small talk with them. If it's a state that I've either lived in or been to, I'll try to make small talk and identify opportunity to connect with them. So that way it's just one more connection in the office that I have to follow up with. From there, you'll either get sent back to the office. Again, depending if it's a House or Senate, you'll have a dedicated space or not. I've had to do meetings in House offices right there where in the reception area, competing with other constituents and folks that are trying to make time. And you really do have 2 minutes would be generous if I want to be honest, in terms of making your pitch, making that hard ask, identifying if this is something that they're going to be interested in or wanting to work on, and then you give them the leave behind folder, and then you just take your notes and you make sure to follow up with them. I usually try to give it a day max before following up or bumping them, and just kind of staying on top of those connections that I do have, and then you just go on to the next office. And then also the cafeterias below the Senate and House buildings, that's a great opportunity. If you see a staffer that you met with earlier, just saying, hey, it's great seeing you, thanks for making time, and just kind of, go on. But it really is about trying to get in front of these staffers and office holders as many times as possible so they have a name and a face. And then that way you do have those connections to follow up, whether if it's with this bill or the next bill, or if you have a question, or if it does make it to the committee, or if you want to try to get someone to testify on one of these committees. It's just really is about getting as many connections as you can. And I know Cindy Isaacson, who's our association president right now, is all about making connections. She's been a wonderful advocate for that, and has also started a great program where we reach out to offices in good times and bad, just not when we need something, and say, hey, we have members in your district. We saw that this happened with the member, and just want to reach out and convey their sympathy or congratulations, and make sure that, again, we're maintaining those relationships for a long-term effort. Over when you do get done on one side, it's at least a 10-minute walk to the other side, and then you got to go through security again. If you've been on our boot camp event, I'm sure you all are familiar with that. But it's fun. I like it. It's a labor of love. I'm a policy wonk and history nerd, so I love always going up to the Hill any chance I have and just kind of taking it in. It never gets old being on the Hill and, kind of nerding out and seeing them do all the media hits, whether it's in the Cannon House office building or over in the Senate side or in the tunnels and stuff like that. And seeing if you're going to pop up on C-SPAN or on the news, just walking down between the office buildings and stuff. So, yeah.
Well, it's certainly not the sexy work that people might think. It's not like House of Cards. It's
no.
it's
more like
very right. And I understand the sales comparison very well. I mean, I do a lot of biz dev in my own business, but it's about building relationships and getting in front of people and getting a lot of no's before you get yeses. And so that's a lot of hard work involved in that. It's funny you mentioned C-SPAN. I used to watch C-SPAN in high school just for fun because I was a weird kid like that too. So it takes a certain type for sure.
Yeah. No, it's the bucket list is to get on a background in one of the committee hearings on C-SPAN, like one of those SNL
that'd be
skits.
Great.
Yeah.
I love it. So tell me a little bit more for people in maybe court reporters in general across the country or members of the NCRA. Why should court reporters care about what's happening in DC? Why should this particular, the hive of scum and villainy in our own galaxy be so important to them individually?
Well, I think it's just important just to be informed regardless. And, I'll kind of hop off the soapbox for a minute here. But really, with all the developments of artificial intelligence just in the last year, I mean, in 2024, 135 bills were introduced at the state level and only 39 got enacted. And then in 2025, you had a little over 1,200 at the state level and 145 got enacted. And now we're looking at over 1,500 bills on the state level. And I don't have a final number yet, but it just shows you at the state level, everything kind of bubbles up, but also things can trickle down. And you saw that with some of the recent bills with the current administration that wanted to have a clear federal precedent when it comes to AI and overturn those state laws. So there's a uniform policy that everyone can follow. And that's, what we're kind of hoping for with this oversight of AI in Courts Act and kind of being able to study and see the cause and effect of having AI in court systems. Very specific ask. It's a very specific bill, but it also gives very specific solutions to what we're trying to find out. And the reason why it's important to have court reporters and specifically NCRA members involved is because you are the advocates. You are the ones that can provide the best context because you live it every day, whether if you're a student, whether if you're establishing a career, whether if you're making that career change or whether if you're retired, it doesn't matter. You still have that information. And at this level, information is a currency. And it's up to members to be the best advocate that they can have, which is themselves, and advocate for this legislation to get enacted. There's no, as much as I love learning about the court reporting and captioning industries and legal videography, I'm not going to have that day-to-day experience of sitting in that chair up by the judge, up in those hearings and depositions and be able to say, hey, this is what I'm noticing, this is what I'm seeing, and this is what I'm hearing, and this is why it matters. There's always that ripple effect outside of the courtroom. And sometimes when people have to ask what a transcript is, usually they're dealing with the consequences of a digital failure that is all too real and all too severe. And you don't want this to end up being one of those things where you're having to play catch up on. And this is the train leaving the station. And I'm not trying to, saber rattle or anything or scare anyone, but at the same time that we're on the clock and it's go time, and we need to have this bill get through committee, get passed by Congress on a bipartisan basis, and get signed by the president. And we're going to look at every which way we can, and that means having all hands on deck. That means having every person in every state that NCRA has making those calls when it comes time for it, which should be sooner than later. But just going back to your point, it's about being able to convey what our folks experience day to day.
Right. Well, and that's great to share. And I'm glad that you kind of articulated it the way you did there. And maybe for the reporters out there, can you share a behind the scenes story from lobbying efforts specifically about this bill, which I know we have a number of co-sponsors it's bipartisan. Maybe I don't know how much you can share publicly about it, but some of the lobbying efforts to get those particular Congress people and senators on board with this bill, maybe some of what you did to make that happen.
Sure. So, great example was 2 weeks ago when I was on the Hill. I met with the representative from Vermont, and I was just kind of, studying up on some last minute efforts. And again, I was just standing out in the hallway on C-SPAN on my phone, and I watched a recent committee hearing where they were cross-examining the Attorney General, and they were going back and forth. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. AI wouldn't pick up any of that, the back and forth. And with our folks having at least a 95% plus accuracy in capturing the record, that was just a real solid point that I was able to make to her staffer and say, your boss, none of that would have gotten picked up accurately. None of that would have been, captured and put on the record. And you could just kind of see the dots being connected with them and trying to understand what I'm trying to convey here in terms of why this matters, whether it's a large case or a small case, and just kind of giving them the context that helps, help them understand it in their day-to-day up on the Hill. And then that's probably the best example I have, most recent too.
Did we have relationships with, for instance, Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, or Peter Welch of Vermont, or Harriet Hageman of Wyoming? How did we lay upon those particular representatives?
So Senator Wicker was a constituent asked by Candace O'Barr-Jones of Mississippi, who's also on the NCRA PAC governing board and is currently serving as the Mississippi Court Reporter Association president. Wonderful person. Had the opportunity to go down to Mississippi with President Isaacson and speak at their conference and get to know more folks from there. She's a wonderful person, and she has just been really very productive in her time and leadership down there, and just had another bill signed by the governor doubling the page rate for officials in the state, and also had a couple other bills. She worked with us in getting meetings scheduled with Senator Wicker's office and went there herself the last 2 consecutive years to get him to sponsor this effort. And then also Representative Hageman was another NCRA PAC board member from last year who made a constituent ask at Boot Camp as well, and met with her one-on-one with their group, and was able to secure her sponsorship on the bill. From there, our advocacy team worked with other offices, and once there's a sponsor, you can kind of work within the committees and show that, hey, this member is sponsoring this effort. We think you'd be interested in it. This is something you would be willing to meet on and engage with. And then our team goes from there and schedules the meetings. It goes through the council vetting process. Again, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and just making sure everyone's satisfied with the bill. Go back and forth between the offices and our team, to make sure everyone's on the same page. It gets introduced. You have the press releases go out, and then from there, we also can show, hey, Senator Welch in Vermont is sponsoring this over on the Senate side. Bring it over to the representative from Vermont. Say, hey, this is something we think you may be interested in, since Senator Welch is working on it. And then also just trying to reach out to other members on the committees and say, this is a bipartisan effort now. We want to get as many sponsors as we can, regardless of party, just to kind of cover our bases. So it does go back to our members being active, being up here in person, boots on the ground, making those asks, and then also following up in district back home. So those were the 2 folks that were able to help us secure the sponsorship. Both were at boot camp for the last 2 consecutive years, so it does make a difference.
In that, I want to focus in on both of those things, both the NCRA PAC and the boot camp, and in terms of how we get things done in DC, because as Herculean as your efforts are, and Dave's, as staffers on the NCRA association, really it's a team effort, right, to your point. And one other comment I wanted to make, I know from the state side of things for the California Deposition Reporters Association, my partner Stephanie has lobbied up in Sacramento, and she was asked point blank when we were going to co-sponsor a bill, or we had something we wanted to bring forward to the legislature. They asked, well, how many people are there in your membership? And, thousands is better than hundreds. Tens of thousands is better than thousands. And so, one thing I wanted to point out to anybody listening in is, if this is a membership plug for the NCRA, that just being a member helps, because when you go and lobby in DC, I'm sure questions like that come up for you too, right, Colin?
Absolutely. One example was we had a member from New York who's now in the House leadership, and we made sure to point out that he had something crazy like 5 or 6 federal courthouses in his own district, and just saying that we have members in there, we have members on the House floor, in these committee hearings, and it does come up because that's their understanding of it. If they're not an attorney or we're a judge, or we had one member, Representative Ron Kahn from Wisconsin, who was a longtime champion, whose spouse was a court reporter. So again, it goes back to providing context. And you're absolutely right. There is strength in numbers, and there is strength in showing folks that back home there are people in their district or their state that are principals in this effort.
So I would just say, as I'm a member, obviously, of the NCRA, and so is my partner. But if you're a court reporter anywhere in the country, it's really important for you to have a seat at the table through your membership in the NCRA. And so I strongly recommend people join the NCRA to have that voice, because you might be in a district where there's a representative that would be hugely beneficial to pass a bill, right? So that kind of ties into the other two things you mentioned, which is boot camp, right? So we can talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk a little bit about the NCRA PAC and how having PAC board members help with this particular AI bill was really important. But speak a little bit about boot camp first, and why everybody who, if they haven't done it yet, should consider doing it.
Yeah, so boot camp, or the formal title is the NCRA Leadership and Legislative Boot Camp event. That's the brainchild of Dave Weinhold, our executive director, and it is a whirlwind 72 hours, if that, event where you fly into DC. It's been held at the Embassy Suites in Old Town Alexandria, right across the river from the Capitol. And it is a boot camp event. You sign in, you go to the table, you have a seat, and then we have speakers that are subject experts come in, whether if it's Dave or in-house, or we have outside folks come in, and they, like you touched on earlier, they pull back the curtain. They tell you they teach you how to make the hard asks, how to identify the opportunities that you need to be an effective advocate, not just of DC for that Tuesday, but for when you go back home, and you can take it back with you to your state association at the state and local level, and even in your workplace. And it even includes mock committee hearings, and then also learning how to go up to people that you see, whether it's in a restaurant or in the hallway, and doing those elevator pitches, and then also learning how to network. And you really do make a lot of friends, and you do make a lot of connections up on the Hill, whether if it's with office holders or staffers. And anyone can tell you, it's different every year. And this year we had the highest attendance in over a decade. So we definitely have that energy going in for this year's effort on the Hill. And every time at that post Hill Day dinner, we always do a debriefing. Everyone shares their stories, and everyone's exhausted, but everyone is just over the moon about their experience, and swapping war stories, and sharing what they picked up on and what leads they have. And then we compile the notes, and we follow up with the offices. And then it's my favorite event of the year for NCRA. And I know I probably shouldn't say that with conference coming up, but it really is. I love it.
Yeah, that's great. And I know my partner's done it before. I haven't had a chance to do it yet, but we've done some lobbying in Sacramento, so I love that kind of stuff. And I do think it's an eye opener for anybody who does it. To be in the room where it happens, as the Hamilton song says, is just, I mean, as a civic exercise as an American citizen, I think it's a really worthwhile exercise to do, but especially to do it for your professional organization is just a really important thing, I think.
Absolutely. It really is a great experience. And like I said, every time you get up on the Hill, and it's always a fun event.
So let's talk a little bit about the NCRA PAC, because I serve on the PAC board. We have a number of really motivated members who are on the board, but other people, but contributing to the PAC as well. Like the importance of that. If you're not on the board as a member, what's the significance of it? What does it do? How does it help?
So the NCRA PAC was established back in 1981. Over the years, it's had highs and lows, and we're looking to rebuild the war chest, because with this federal bill being dropped, I'll be blunt, the reality of it is that we need to have a strong war chest. We need to have the coffers filled, and to show that we can cut a check for someone that's going to be a champion for our cause, and on a case-by-case basis. Again, PAC is nonpartisan. It'll be treated more as investments in champions that will be, excuse me. So it will be a nonpartisan effort that will take it on a case-by-case basis, that will make sure that champions are vetted and, aren't treated just as a blank venture, but to make sure that we invest those funds in worthwhile efforts coming off a record-breaking fundraising year, and just to show that, we are going to be players at the federal level, and be able to compete with other interests as well.
Sure. I think there's that saying, for better or for worse, money is the mother's milk of politics, and there's just no way around it.
Absolutely.
So we have to do that. And what I love about our organization is that we are truly nonpartisan. I mean, the profession provides access to justice and maintains the record of what's spoken in our criminal justice system and civil justice system, and that affects everybody. Left, right,
Absolutely.
doesn't matter the party. And so we need to approach all of our bills, I think, in the way that you said, where we're looking for bipartisan support, because it really is a bipartisan issue, what we do as a service. So I think that's great. And so at the upcoming convention, if you're going, come see the booth, the packed booth. I'll be there at the booth. I know, Colin, you'll be there quite a bit. Darlene, our co-chair, will be there, as well as maybe some of our members. But it's a good opportunity to see some of our wins, to see what we do. Though I'm sure we're going to have some of the information about the bills we supported, especially this big AI bill. But yeah, just come check us out and consider donating to the cause, so to speak, because right now it's a very critical time in our industry, especially with AI. And maybe we can pivot a little bit to that now and talk about AI and the future of court reporting, and how our advocacy efforts are primed for that, if you will.
Yeah, so we responded to 2 calls for information from the White House regarding artificial intelligence, and we replied with, the first time, basically advocating for awareness of what was documented in the NCRA white paper, things about bias, things about failures, documentation of these failures in various cases, and just kind of providing the context that, you need to tread lightly when it comes to AI in the court systems. Everything isn't as simple as some of the folks would like to make it. There's a lot of pitfalls here. And then for the second one, for second response to information, we were actually contacted by the White House personnel to submit our information. We did that. It's all available online through the Records Archives Act, and then also advocating for what we are advocating for in the current bill, just as a safeguard. So that way, when the White House did put out its position, our advocacy was part of that effort. And then also it gives us kind of a backdrop, showing folks on the Hill saying, hey, we're working with the White House. You've submitted information to both the Biden and Trump administrations to show that, we're pretty persistent and consistent about this, just kind of harking on that nonpartisan aspect of it. And then, like you touched on, this is something that affects the administration and restoration of justice. The term that I like to use that kind of got picked up at boot camp this year is judicial integrity. It just kind of is an umbrella term to show that, both sides of the coin are affected by this, and there is a ripple effect that can be felt outside the courtroom if something isn't captured. And that was the other thing about AI, and I was trying to provide this to a staffer. AI tries to predict what is going to be spoken. Court reporters capture what is spoken, and there is a pretty big difference between the two, depending on what the AI platform is basing its system off of in terms of trying to predict what is going to be said next. And you have all these horrible cases that we've provided to lawmakers that show the consequences of that, and just again, the ripple effect can be devastating outside of courtrooms.
Right. And I think Cindy Isaacson just had a great video she posted talking about AI in transcripts and sort of the pitfalls of using that as what can happen if you try to use an unofficial transcript with AI. So there's a lot to talk about there. And so getting back to this bill, what are the next steps, if you can speak publicly or share anything about what happens next, and how the individual court reporter can be involved in helping to push this across the finish line, so to speak?
Absolutely. So our advocacy efforts and team right now are focused on getting bipartisan co-sponsors that are on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate and the House, and making sure that we have kind of a CYA effort going on in terms of making sure that this makes it out of the committee. Once it gets out of the committee, or before we have the committee hearing, we're going to go ahead and have folks that are in those states of the members on the committee or in those districts contact their legislators and make that concentrated advocacy effort and ask them to support this bill and make sure it gets out of committee. Once it does get out of committee and it gets a 4-vote schedule, that's when we'll mobilize the entire membership base and have them contact the officers of their senators and representatives and really encourage them to support this. And that'll entail phone calls, emails, letters, if they're close enough to DC or want to make the trek, in-person visits, bins, mints. We're going to all the above effort when it does come time for a 4-vote. But in the meantime, the priority is making sure it gets that committee hearing and it makes sure that it gets out of the committee.
Great. So depending on when this episode drops, if you as an NCRA member get a call or an email from Colin or Dave asking for you to do this, we hope you will. It's very simple. Usually there's a pre-filled letter that you can sign or email to send out, and it's really needed so that the representatives know this is a real issue, it affects real people, and they'll move on that. So I would just ask any member who is in a district of the judiciary or Congress committees, and those representatives or know somebody who does, to reach out to them to do this. And same thing when it comes up to the general floor vote. If you know your state's U.S. senator or your state's congressperson, to drop a line. And the NCRA will have all that information, especially I think on our advocacy page on the website. I'm sure there'll be plenty about that there. So thank you, Colin, for all of that. Wanted to talk about a couple other things if we have a few more minutes here. So we talked a little bit about the role each reporter can play in advocacy. We talked about boot camp and the convention, but let's talk about the bigger picture about protecting the record in general. So AI is one element of this, but there are other issues that can come up that can affect the integrity of the record or protecting the synchronicity of the record. What's at stake if our advocacy efforts fall short?
If they fall short, the consequences can be devastating. If there isn't that communication between state and national associations, we can only do so much. And we don't want to repeat any mistakes of the past in terms of stepping on toes and making sure that it's not always a uniform effort that will be beneficial for one state or the other, and making sure that we have that open door communication between NCRA and the state associations. And I've really tried to nurture that relationship with the states and try to be encouraging and, always have that open door and always available for collaboration and always welcome collaboration. And there has been instances where, we've identified something for a state that they weren't aware of, and they've said, thanks, but no thanks, but we want to take this effort on by ourselves. And that's totally understandable, because certain states that works better than having a national association swoop in, and also vice versa. So again, just clear communication. So that way there can be strengths in numbers. We can share that insight that we have that we've had with other states and be like, hey, this is what happened in state A. This may be relevant for you, or here's a trend that we're seeing. And one of those trends right now is with the licensing boards and the definition of what court reporting is. And in Georgia, there was a recent example of what the licensing effort can do in terms of undoing or opening Pandora's box with digital and not having any safeguards or ways to kind of pump the brakes. But then you also have good stories like out of Oklahoma, whose members were up at boot camp and were telling me about what was going on and how no one was really sure what was going to happen if they weren't able to meet the legislators and they were able to get down to the Capitol and were at least able to pump the brakes and kill the bill for this session in terms of a bill that would let digital in and kind of be able to revisit this process and provide the context that the legislators are going to need to understand that the consequences are going to far outweigh the benefits of what they were trying to implement, and just kind of, tailor that argument to their state. So that can be the consequence of not having a strong advocacy program at the national level. Again, information is a currency, communication is key, and then also just making sure that, there is collaboration among states and then also between the state associations, which is why I always try to be encouraging on the NCRA listserv for state delegates. If they see something, say something. That's why we launched the NCRA GR radar for people to submit or flag bills or memos or anything that they think would be worth having investigated. So that way it gets put in front of me and we can send it out to our research and investigate team and kind of vet it and chew on it and then give them our feedback.
That's a great point. And for members or court reporters who may be not familiar with the term NCRA, that's something that happens there's a NCRA day at the convention, but maybe explain what that term is and what it means.
Sure. So NCRA is the National Congress of State Associations. Each state gets 2 delegates, except for Texas and California. They have 2 associations, so they get their own 2 delegates. And what they do is they meet up every year at conference. Currently working on trying to make it a little different this year, and I have more of a leadership training seminar for the NCRA meeting as a way to kind of meet the demand of what was being chatted about on the listserv. And then also it's a way for states to kind of boil down what they're hearing, communicate, share. We have quarterly meetings. Our current chair is Yvette Heinze of Montana, and then Christopher Rayo from Texas is going to be taking over this year. And they've been working diligently for the last couple of years together to make sure that, nothing really falls through the crack. And we've been able to help state associations that were struggling, live to fight another day, and kind of help spread the word and raise awareness with that. NCRA is kind of, it's the crown jewel of all the committees and delegations, just because it has so much information and so many moving parts to it. And we have had and so fortunate to have such great chairs and board liaisons that have worked really closely with one another and making sure that things get, put in front of the board with NCRA, put in front of leadership at NCRA, and make sure that, the demands are being met, whether if it was with the NCRA toolkit that started under Debbie Dibble and got delivered under Yvette, and then also just making sure that the long-term projects are delivered as well as the short-term.
That's great. And I think it's a really fantastic program and that Congress that you put together, because again, it ties into the fact that we have our state associations and our state issues, we have the support of this national organization with the tools and resources that's provided by the NCRA, and working together is the only way we're going to get these challenges or these potential opportunities pushed over and become reality. So, or block these challenges, so to speak. So I think it's important that if you're in a state association, and I don't know if every state association goes to NCRA, if they have representatives all there, but if they don't, they definitely should consider that, especially for this year. The convention's coming up in July. It's going to be in Washington. It's, for those of us on the West Coast, it's a lot easier to fly out to, but NCRA is great. And I think it ties into what you talk about, that we've got members in every state. We've got associations in those states, and we need to be sharing information. I know a lot of times our profession is a very solitary one, for oftentimes, especially if you're a freelancer, you may not ever really engage with other court reporters. You may not see other court reporters. And it can be a sort of a solitary lifestyle, but it really is important to join the associations of your state and the national one, so that your voice can be magnified, because it is a powerful voice. And so kudos to you for the NCRA association and for bringing those groups together. And I think there's probably a few states that don't have associations, or if they do, they're very, very small. And so is there anything the NCRA does or to help foster, educating individual reporters to maybe start an association, or to help foster regrowing those associations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go back to the NCRA toolkit, which was started initially under Debbie Dibble, and to their credit, got the ball rolling with that, and it was delivered in the last year or so. Dave Wenhold was instrumental in really making sure that that toolkit had the resources for a variety of topics, and specifically for association day-to-day management, whether if it was fundraising, obtaining membership, drives, governance, relations. He had everyone in NCRA, each department, whether if it was comms, education, or all cut a video presentation on what they need to do day to day to make sure that their state association can survive and also thrive as a best practice. And then we also had other items in there, whether if it's like, various documents, various failure documentation, generic forms for signing up members, what to do for career days, things like that. So, I mean, it really is a wonderful resource that has been years in the making. And then also with compiling information from the Strong Committee that was started under Sue Terry, that have all done a wonderful work in documenting the dangers of AI, and have been just a wonderful resource and a wonderful foundation to build this latest federal advocacy effort off of as a jumping point, and help raise awareness in the membership through NCRA of the dangers and pitfalls of AI.
Great. Well, I thank you so much, Colin, for coming on the pod. I know we're getting close here to the end time of our episode, but I wanted to ask you just maybe a couple more questions real quickly. Just sort of anecdotally or fun conversations you may have you had any surprising conversations with lawmakers about court reporting?
Again, going back to 2 Fridays ago when I was going up to the Hill to meet with the representative staff from Vermont, I walked into the office and this was the first meeting I had, and the principal, the representative, the congresswoman was right there on the other side, playing around with what I'm assuming is her kids. I didn't want to interrupt her, and she was like, "Hey, nice to meet you." And I was like, "Hi, I'm Colin with the National Court Reporters Association," and it just goes to show, you don't really know what you're in for unless you're in there in person, boots on the ground, and that's just an experience I'll never forget. It was also a great opportunity to connect and get introduced to her staffer, who was wonderful and had a great meeting. And I've been following up with them since to try and secure her co-sponsorship of our bill on the House side as a House Judiciary Committee member.
I love it. What keeps you motivated in this work? Why do you keep doing it day after day? Why do you get on a train and go to DC and, and do these things?
Well, this has been, I first joined NCRA in 2021 as content manager, and I was in that position for 3 years before being moved over to GR. And like I said, I've always been a policy wonk, a history nerd, and I thoroughly enjoy reading bills and legislation and watching C-SPAN and following along on Twitter and all that. And but being able to meet all the members since 2021, and getting to know the people that you're advocating for, I feel is like a very unique experience in the advocacy industry and lobbying. But, being able to see them at conference in person, talking to them on a regular basis through email or social media on LinkedIn, being able to get phone calls from folks that are on staff or in the membership, just seeing how you're doing. You befriend them, and you see them evolve in their career. They see me evolve in my career, and their success is my success. My success is their success, and it's much. I feel much more invested here than I have in other capacities with jobs. And I think that's a real difference when you know the people that you're advocating for, when you know that, they're small business owners, they're generational, they're legacy court reporters because they're the third or fourth generation. They're the person that is changing their career in an effort to, be the breadwinner. There's someone that is a student that's just getting, along. And when you get to know these folks and you see them at conference every year, or you see them pop up on the listserv, or you see them celebrating online of an accomplishment or getting their certification or at boot camp, it's exciting, and you become invested, and, they become not just your colleagues, but your friends. And, I like getting up early and going on the train into DC and spending the day. And, by the time I get back on to go home, my dogs are barking, and, I'm just like, okay, cool. That was 12 hours on the Hill. I had, 20 meetings. I did my best for the day. I can look at myself in the mirror, and know that I did my best for the day. And I have that many more leads for the CART Act, which is our captioning bill. We have that many more leads for bipartisan co-sponsors for the Oversight and AI Act. And I'm standing on the shoulders of my predecessors, Jocelyn Moore, Dave Wenhold, Matt. I'm able to do that because of my colleagues on staff at all levels who've helped me become a better professional since 2021, and also because of the membership. And they keep me abreast of situations and flag things for me, and whether if it's strong, whether if it's different presidents or whatever, everyone has their own unique thing that they've brought to this that I'm able to pull from and be a stronger professional, stronger advocate, be willing to learn more, whether it's from Dave or anyone else that has been a part of NCRA in the past or present. So that's what keeps me going, and I love it. I consider myself so fortunate to be part of NCRA.
Well, we're fortunate to have you, and I love hearing that. I love that we have such a passionate advocate for our profession there in DC. And for all of our listeners, again, if you're not a member of the NCRA yet, please become one. please consider coming to convention, and especially if you've never been, come to the Legislative Boot Camp. It'll be coming up in February 2027. Is that right? Right around
Correct.
there again. So, which will be here before you know it. So, with all that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. If you haven't listened to us before, we run podcasts usually every other week, and on the court reporting profession. Please like, subscribe, follow, whatever you choose. And we hope that you'll join us in July for the NCRA convention, where Colin will be there. I'll be there. Come to the booth. Come say hi. We'd love to meet you. Colin, again, thanks for coming on the pod today, and have a great day. Folks, we'll see you again soon. Take care.